Hello. So I'm going to read you some information about Richard. There's a bit more information here to help you answer the questions, and you have got this sheet. It's one of your attachments. So it looks like this. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. You don't have to follow it with me. You could just read it yourself, or you can listen to me reading it now, or follow it and listen at the same time. Okay, so Richard the Lionheart. Henry II, that's Richard's father, had ruled England so well that the country almost ran itself. It was just as well that it did, because the next king wasn't very interested in England. He was Richard I, and he only visited his new kingdom twice in the whole 10 years of his reign. He came over from Normandy to be crowned and stayed here for less than 4 months. This was back in 1189. 5 years later he came back, and this time for only 2 months. Then he returned to France. He was not to set foot in England again. His wife, Berengaria, holds a very strange record. She must surely be the only Queen of England never to have visited this country at all. The reason why Richard was away so much was his love of fighting. He was a tall, well-built man who was extremely strong and yet light on his feet. He was an expert with nearly every kind of weapon, and the only thing he liked more than a practice fight was a real war. When he had the chance to take part in a crusade, nothing could hold him back. He stayed here just long enough to raise the money he needed for his expedition. He is said to have told someone that he would sell London if he could find a buyer. By 1192, he'd captured a string of towns and castles on the coast of the Holy Land, but was never able to retake Jerusalem. In spite of Richard's many victories in battle, squabbles among the Christian leaders made it impossible for him to win the war. Then, news reached him that his brother John was plotting to take his throne from him. He set out for home, but was shipwrecked. He had to try and make his way overland through the territory of an enemy, the Duke of Austria. He didn't get very far before he was arrested and thrown into a dungeon. The Duke demanded a ransom of 150,000 marks from the people of England before he would set their king free. Afraid that Richard might be rescued, the Duke kept the name of his prison secret. A story is told of Blondel, the king's musician, who travelled through Austria in disguise. When he came to a castle, he stood under the walls and sang Richard's favourite song. At last, he was rewarded by hearing a voice joining in the chorus. He'd found his lord. By this time, the king's subjects in England had raised most of the ransom, which in today's money might be about £2 or £3 million. Actually, I think it's probably a lot more because this book is quite old. Richard was released and returned to England. John thought it wiser to slip away to France. Richard had to raise an army and take it across the Channel to defend his lands in Normandy. He spent the last 5 years of his life abroad. He was killed by an arrow while besieging a French castle called Chaluz. Richard was known as Coeur de Lion, which means Lionheart. He would have understood the first title better than the second, for although born in England, he spoke French and thought of himself as French. All the same, he was one of the bravest warrior kings we've ever had. Okay, and if you do look at this, there's a picture of him besieging the castle in Chaluz. As he is on the battlements, and there is a picture of his tomb, which is in France. He's buried in France. Okay, so now you've got to answer all the questions that are on the next attachment. Okay, be brilliant.